Today on the Lazy D&D Talk Show, we're going to look at the Tome of Beast Monster Cards Kickstarter going on by Inkwell Ideas. Blades of the Dark now is part of a bundle of holding. You can get a lot of Blades in the Dark material for a very reasonable cost. We're going to look at the Monstrous Compendium Volume 2 focused on Dragonlance, released by Wizards of the Coast on D&D Beyond. There's a particular article in Arcadia Issue 22 that I wanted to talk about today, Arcadia by MCDM. And we're going to do a product spotlight on Raging Swan's Dungeon Dressing for 5e, along with Patreon questions from December 2022 Patreon Q&A. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk to you about all things D&D. This show is brought to you by the patrons of Sly Flourish. Patrons of Sly Flourish get access to all kinds of cool exclusive material like the City of Arches sourcebook, exclusive adventures, a dedicated Discord channel, the Patreon monthly Q&A, and all kinds of other stuff. But most of all, they help me put on shows like this. To the patrons of Sly Flourish, thank you so much for your outstanding support. It seems like only recently we were talking about Tome of Beast 3. It's actually very handy that Tome of Beast 3 has come out, and my friend Joe over at Inkwell Ideas has partnered with Kobold Press to put out a Kickstarter for the Tome of Beast monster cards. This is something that Inkwell Ideas has been doing now for, I think, all three of the other monster books, and you can actually get all of the cards for these monster books in one Kickstarter. If you're the kind of DM that really feels like the card of a monster is handier than having a book, if it's the kind of thing where you like to have all of your monsters in front of you, if it's the kind of thing you would copy and paste into a different work, this is a fantastic Kickstarter for you. In this Kickstarter, you can get all 400 plus monsters from the Tome of Beast 3 in card form. They have the artwork for the monster on one side. They have a stat block for the monster on the other. In some cases, it's pretty condensed because there's a lot of material for that. So I know Joe has gone through to kind of condense the text a bit so that it can all fit on these cards. He brings up a list of what are the different advantages you have, that you can sort the monsters that you just want for that session in front of you. You can clip them. I really like this idea of if you have your GM screen, you can clip the monsters to your GM screen actually in initiative order and have the artwork so the players can see the art of the monster on one side and you can see the stats of the monster on the other. Really handy. Good way to track initiative. They really look beautiful. Good art. Handful of creatures in the book that don't have art. They're adding art for the ones that don't. And really handy that you can actually sort them by terrain type. So if you have people that are going through a swamp, you can get all the swampy ones, put them together in a list, sort them, shuffle them, and randomly draw a monster to see what kind of monster they have. So if you're really into the cards, this is a good way to do it. What's interesting is this Kickstarter also has a way for you to buy all of the monsters from all three previous Kobold Press monster books, all four. So that's 1,600 monsters worth of cards. It is not super cheap, right? $60 for the deck, which is about as much as it costs you to get the book, but it includes both the PDF and the printed version of the deck of it, and it is 432 cards. It is a great big box of cards. And for $90, you can get all the PDFs, but $225, which is, I know, ain't cheap, but it's 4 monster books worth of monsters. You can get more than 1,600. I think it's probably like on the order of 1,700 or something like that. 1,700 monsters in a great big box. They all come in like a slipcase, or not slipcase box. They all come in a nice box, and you can use it to sort through all of your monsters and find the monsters you want. So for some people who, if you are the kind of person who is printing your monster stat blocks out when you're running them, if you're the kind of person that takes the PDF of the book and copies the monster and pastes it into the thing and then prints that out, this might be a better solution for you to use these cards and to get these cards. So that Kickstarter is going on now. It is a shorter Kickstarter. It has only 9 days left to go. I think by the time this video hits YouTube, which is tomorrow, be at 7 or 8 days left. So definitely check it out. Joe's a great guy. He's been making these kinds of cards for all kinds of things. I have I'm here on my desk, other decks of cards from Inkwell Ideas. Really fantastic stuff. Great way to look at it. Independent producer. Fantastic Kickstarter. So you can find a link to the Deck of Beasts 3 Kickstarter down in the show notes below. A while back, I guess it was a year or so ago, I ran Blades in the Dark. I was very interested in running Blades in the Dark, and Blades in the Dark is currently now on the bundle of holding. You can pick up the whole Blades in the Dark pack for like $13. That includes the Blades in the Dark Duskwall heist deck, the Duskwall street maps, and the Alone in the Dark solo rules, as well as the settings collection, which includes Band of Blades, Scum and Villainy, Hack the Planet, Fistful of Darkness, Glow in the Dark. So lots of different scenarios that you can run for Blades in the Dark. I was very very interested in this because I did not have those other ones. Bands of Blades, Scum and Villainy, Hack the Planet, Fistful of Darkness, Glow in the Dark. I didn't have those. And I knew that those were ones I wanted to take a look at. If you are interested in experimenting with or understanding or studying Blades in the Dark, and you think you wanted to look at like what it would be like to do it in a grim fantasy setting or in a science fiction setting or anything like that, this is a fantastic way to get it. The bundles of holding are always really, really good deals. The threshold price for this is about just under $27. 10% of your money is going to the Diana Jones Award for Emerging Designers. That's a really cool 501(c)(3) non-for-profit to help up-and-coming game designers. And for your $27-ish, you're going to get 6 settings worth of material for Blades in the Dark. So you're getting a significant deal. So anyway, if you are interested in Blades in the Dark and you want to get a digital version of the book, this is probably the best deal you're going to get on the digital version of the book. You can find a link to the Blades in the Dark bundle of holding in the show notes below. 17 days left on that. Wizards of the Coast released, along with Dragonlance, which came out. Where's my Dragonlance book? Guess what? Guess what I've got? Guess who joined me in the Sly Flourish Archive? Lord Soth. Look at Lord Soth. I got him. I picked him up 2 days ago, and it's really cool. I'm very, very pleased. Very pleased with my book. So happy. So happy. Lord Soth and I, we're going to go to the park later. I've loved Lord Soth since I was 13. So I got my copy of Dragonlance, and also Wizards of the Coast released a free Monstrous Compendium Volume 2. They did this back with Spelljammer as well. The interesting thing is back in the Spelljammer time, they formatted it in a PDF. I think that was right around the time when Wizards of the Coast bought D&D Beyond. Now it looks like they are just putting the monsters in D&D Beyond. There isn't a PDF available of this, but it's free. Are you really going to complain? Hey, where's my free PDF to go along with my free monsters in the D&D Beyond set? What do we expect, right? It's going to be fine. 11 different monsters that come here in this set. And these look like they were monsters that either didn't make their way into the book, monsters that they might have done some design work on the past, but decided not to include. Maybe page space was an issue. Maybe the monsters just didn't really come up in the adventures, but we get them anyway. The monsters range all the way from CR1 to CR22. All different kinds. They are definitely focused on Dragonlance-y sort of monsters. We get a Dream Eater, CR7 Dream Eater, which I guess eats dreams. I haven't looked too deep into their monsters. There's a couple of monsters that I took a hard look at, and then a few monsters that I didn't. It's free. I don't have to sell you on this. If you're a subscriber to D&D Beyond, you can go and you can take a look at your monsters and decide it's cool, right? Why not? Free monsters. Who doesn't want some cool free monsters? There were a couple of things I know. So Ember, this is one. Prepare for a rant. Prepare for a rant, everybody. Ember. Ember is a huge dragon. What's interesting is they don't say the age. It used to be like if one were an ancient dragon or an adult dragon or something like this. In this case, I think they just say Ember is a huge dragon. I guess it doesn't matter how old Ember is. But Ember is a CR22 dragon, legendary dragon, and has right off the bat like 270 hit points at CR22. Feels really low. I remember some folks in Discord were talking about this, and like at CR22, if you're facing like CR14s or level 14 or 15 characters, they could do 270 damage in a round easily. So if you look at a monster like this, you want it to be lasting 3 rounds. My general rule of thumb is that hit points of a monster at this CR should probably be 20 times its CR. So in this case, I think it should have like 420 hit points. And again, like what's its max? So max is 20 times 12, 240 plus 140. 240 plus 140. 380. So if you max Ember's hit points, I think it's probably strong. And you have permission. Not only do you have my permission to increase its hit points, but Jeremy Crawford also has been on a show that I used to run saying, absolutely, you can, the range of hit points, that's the average. Are you fighting the average Ember or like hardcore Ember? And hardcore Ember, turn that dial and give it 380 hit points. But I think 440 would not be out of hand either. You know, it's CR22, big dragon, right? You don't want the dragon to get killed with 3 smites from a paladin. Calisant's aura. At the start of Ember's turn, Ember can force any number of creatures of his choice within 10 feet to make a DC 22 Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, target takes 7 fire damage and is frightened of Ember. The frighten isn't bad. The question is, if you're making a bunch of characters at a pretty high level, roll saving throws, and you're only doing 7 damage, that doesn't feel like very much to me. I'd boost that hell out of that damage. I'd make that like 30. Make that like 30 fire damage, 7 fire damage. The rant is that Ember, shocker, doesn't have enough hit points, isn't doing enough damage. You have heard me on this show before talk about not enough hit points, not enough damage. I am sure somebody out there is going to say, according to all of the calculations that you could do through the Dungeon Master's Guide, Ember is actually appropriately leveled for the amount of stuff that it has. Maybe. I still argue, my big argument on monster design is that regardless, when you have a creature this high in challenge rating, regardless of all of the other abilities it has, it still needs to do a lot of damage to be a threat. That when you reduce a monster's damage or defenses or hit points, for example, by giving it other defenses, that means it's going to be weaker in those other things. So weak that it doesn't matter that it has those other abilities because it can't do enough damage to matter. So the idea is, an example would be hit points. So legendary resistances, Ember has 5 legendary resistances a day. I can't remember the exact math, but it's like every legendary resistance is like 20 hit points or 40 hit points off of its max hit points. Like you reduce its hit points for every legendary resistance it has. But Ember, being a focal point of characters' attacks, needs to have legendary resistance to not suck. So I don't think legendary resistance should have an effect on the monster's CR at all when it's a legendary monster. I think legendary monsters should get that anyway, because they're going to be the target of all of the character's wrath, and it needs legendary resistance in order to survive. So my argument is, and maybe that's why hit points are so low, is because it has so many legendary resistances. Also 5, why not 3? I would give it 3. Other dragons have 3. I don't know why 5 is a good deal. A lot of people I talk to hate legendary resistance anyway. And when you get into 5, it's like, well, nothing's going to land. 3, you at least have to land 3 save or suck spells and have them have it fail their save before those legendary resistances are burned. There's still a strategy to burning legendary resistances. There isn't if it has 5, because it's not going to last that long anyway. You're just going to beat it down. So 5 legendary resistance is probably too many, and also it shouldn't lower its hit points to get legendary resistance, and it should do more damage. Coalescent Aura, Frighten isn't bad, but Frighten also doesn't tend to affect higher level characters anyway. They have lots and lots of ways to get rid of Fright, so it really doesn't matter. So that's a wasted ability. Like, we have 5 lines of text for something that really doesn't do very much. If that did 30 damage, if it was like fireballing every turn, on board, right? Boom, 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 boom. Radiating fire, disintegrate. Any like commoners that come by, they're just turned to ash. 7? Why are we rolling? First of all, why do you give me 5 lines of text? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 5 lines of text. Why do you give me 5 lines of text in this stat block for 7 damage at CR 22? And 2, are you really going to have me rolling every turn for all the poor bastards to see if they take 7 damage? Fireball, man. And it should be half damage if you fail. But 7 damage is that's a useless section. It's the frightening doesn't matter. The damage is too low. If you want my case, just boost that damage up. Those are rookie numbers. Get those numbers up. Special equipment, it dons magical plate, custom forged for its use while wearing the armor, adds its charisma modifier, included in the attack description to its AC. You could probably take this section and stick that in the lore and trim up this stat block and just say like AC 20 special equipment, right? It doesn't matter because all this whole section is just why this is 20. And you already know it's 20. Who cares? Multi-attack makes 1 bite and 2 claw attacks. The bite is 26 plus 13 fire. That's a good respectable bite. 39 points of damage on a bite. That's really good. Claws 22. Not bad. No grapple on this. If you look at the bigger dragons that are in Fizzbands, they often have a grapple and restrain. You could throw that in there if you wanted. Firestorm Breath. Ember exhales rolling flames at an ash 90-foot cone. Creature takes DC 22 dex save. That's really high. On a failed save, takes 56 fire damage and is pushed 30 feet away from Ember and knocked prone. That's pretty good. On a save, the creature takes half damage and no other effects. If the creature is reduced to 0 by this, the creature immediately dies and the body is reduced to ash. So that last part is, I didn't know about that. That is really brutal. I don't know if I like that. I'll tell you, there's a lot of D&D monsters recently have these instant death effects. I was using a Spelljammer monster last night in a game, and it had an effect where it devoured your brain, and it did like 40 damage, and if it reduces you to 0, your brain is devoured. There's something about the instant death on 0. There's probably a bunch of like hardcore OSR people who are like, absolutely, breathes you and drops you to 0, you die. But I could tell you, like, and I guess at this level, that's okay, because like you have ways to deal with death. But boy, that's pretty rough. The interesting thing is the knock on prone. I guess there's no good way to combo the knock-on prone with the multi-attacks because it doesn't really get multi-attacks as legendaries. Alter shape, it can turn into a vulture or a mage. I guess that's part of the story. Again, we have more story. And I don't know that you need that as an action. It can do that, like, again, I'm picking on a monster they gave us for free, and it's not in the book. And if you recall from my spotlight where I went through the Dragonlance book, I actually liked the monsters in the Dragonlance book a lot. So it's funny that I don't like these. Maybe they didn't go through the full design process for this, right? Because these monsters feel differently. But again, 6 lines of text, bonus action to turn into a vulture. Guess what I'm not going to be using in combat? I'm not going to have Ember turn into a vulture in the middle of combat. I'm not going to have him turn into a mage. You can put that in the lore and just say he has the ability to transform himself into a vulture or a mage. That's background lore. It doesn't matter for combat. So throw that out. You stick it as a spell effect if you want. But really, like, to spend 6 lines, 7 lines, an entire give it another bonus action for one. Give it something that can do as a bonus action. Give it shield, right? If it turns into a mage, how come it doesn't have shield? Probably because shield would be a pain in the ass since AC 25 at that point. But I might give it shield, or I might give it some kind of counter spell because it does mage stuff, right? I think one of the things about Ember is it pretends to be a mage. So that's pretty cool. Legendary actions, 3 legendary actions. Pursuit, moves 40 feet in a straight line or a creature it can see and ignores opportunity attacks. Okay, so it can fly around and avoid OAs. Searing Bite, 2 actions. Makes a 1 bite attack. If the attack hits, it deals an additional 7. So it could do, this is kind of cool. Ember can breathe, boom, hits people, 56 fire damage, DC 22 dex save, throws them back, sees who it threw back, then as a legendary flies over to one of the person that's prone without avoiding OAs, and then on its next legendary action can bite that person with advantage, doing a total of 26 plus 20 fire, 26 piercing and 20 fire, 46 points of damage on that bite attack. After that creature took 56 damage in fire damage from losing the prone. That's a fair bit. That's not bad. I would probably let it have claw attacks as a legendary action as well, and that would probably get its damage threshold up. The Sly Flourish official damage threshold for a CR 22 creature is 220 damage. I like to do 7 damage. If a creature's up to CR 20, I do 7 damage per CR. That's kind of my baseline of where I like to see a monster striking at. And if it's above CR 20 and above, I do 10 times CR and 220. And again, an attack that hits multiple creatures counts as double. So 56 damage on the breath weapon is low, I think, because that's 112 points. Plus, let's say it does that bite attack. It's doing 46 plus 112. 46 plus 112 is 158. So 158 divided by 22. No. Is that right? Is 7.18? Is that right? So it's doing 7. That's not bad, right? You know, that's not bad. I was just saying, is the regular bite attack doing more damage than the legendary Searing Bite? No, it makes a bite attack, and if the attack hits, it deals an additional 7 fire. So it's doing additional fire damage on it. So no, it's definitely hitting. So 7's not terrible. 7 is what it would be if it was below CR 20 in mine. So that's not bad. And as you know, you have my full blessing, my full authority to increase the damage on any of this stuff to make Ember a threat. I would certainly consider giving it counterspell and shield, or counterspelly / shieldy short of bonus actions. Get rid of the alter shape. The Coalescent Aura, I would make that a fireball, 28 damage, boom, and they've saved for half. I would have it doing that every turn. Now you got a scary Ember. That's scary Ember. Lots of other monsters I'm not going to go through. Forest Master, a cool kick-ass unicorn. I think it is not. It's a non-legendary CR8 unicorn. You ever need a new unicorn? You got a cool unicorn. Forsworn CR6, a kind of elementally sort of thing where they're like revenants. So you want a cool lawful good undead. I think that's cool. Dragonlance says lawful good undead. Urda is a giant. A couple different Urdas. Never mind gnome inventors. You got these gnomes. I like this one that's got all the crazy Dr. Octopus arms. These are more like, are you going to fight these? Why do I have a giant ass stat block for these creatures you're probably not going to be fighting? But again, free. Why am I complaining? I shouldn't be complaining. Thanoi Hunter, Walrus Man. I think you should make a Walrus Man character stat block. That'd be popular. A new Draconian. So new Draconian, you definitely use CR5. That's a good CR for it. I haven't dug into any of its stats or damage and everything like that. 14 slashing damage on 2 attacks. See, that's really good, right? So it does 28 and then has Flaming Carnage, violent retaliating creature 10 feet of the dragon, hits it with an attack. Draconian make 1 claw attack against that creature. So it's probably going to get this, right? So its damage output, if we want to look at the damage output modifier, and this is why, why do low CR monsters do so much more damage per CR than high CR damage monsters? But this looks really high. 28 plus another 14. 28 plus 14. Whoops. 8 plus 14 plus 4 is 46. 40, I don't have to do the math to figure out that this is a lot higher. Divide by 5. 9.2 damage per turn. I'm sorry, 9.2 damage per CR for the Thrag Draconian. How come Ember's not doing 9.2? Right? He's doing 7. Why are high level monsters doing so less damage? And the reason why is because of those other abilities. The other abilities are weighted higher. Oh, but it can do all those other things. It can knock you prone, all this other stuff. Verminard is another one that I looked at because I was like, ooh, this is cool. A high level CR 17 evil cleric. Badass, right? Looks cool. A lot of lore and Dragonlance lore. Really, the idea of Verminard as a stat block is cool. I just like having it. I don't know if I'm ever going to use Verminard, but really handy if you're going to run a really high level cleric. If you need a equivalent of a mage, although boy, this is much higher than an archmage stat block. But if you wanted like a high power mage, what would you have? So let's take a look at Verminard. Again, we just looked at one that had a 9.2 damage per challenge rating. What's the challenge rating here? 143 hit points. Come on, that's less than 10 per CR. I don't care if he's got AC 20, right? That's really, really low. You want mine 170, what did I say, 15, right? So I say monsters' hit points for monsters below CR 20 should be about 15, but 15 to 20. Particularly legendary monsters should probably have higher hit points because they're going to be the focus. Everyone's going for this guy. Every spell, every magic item, every single use thing, everything they've got is going after this. You're going to have smite on every attack against this guy because you hate named things. Players hate named bad guys. They hate guys that stand out. They hate them. And they will pour every ounce of every thing they've got onto them. And monsters that are built to be targets like this should be built to be targets by withstanding that, to hold up to their challenge rating. I think he should have at least 200 and some hit points. I would go with 240, right? Max 140 is ridiculous. You're going to get killed in 2 turns. Like Vinard, if he loses initiative, he's dead, right? If he loses initiative, is he down on initiative? He's dead. Draconic Command, when a dragon or creature with a draconic trait within 30 feet of Verminard makes an attack roll, the creature makes a d4. So it gives Draconic Bless to everything around it, which is kind of a pain in the ass because a lot of extra dice. Legendary Resistance, good deal. Special Equipment. This case, like because it has Nightbringer and Nightbringer as a whole, there's a whole like block for Nightbringer. That's one where you probably say, okay, Nightbringer, mention the fact in the stat block that he has Nightbringer. So that's not bad. Legendary Resistance, Nightbringer wields, Nightbringer grants him Dark Vision, immunity to fire damage, charmed and frightened. So he can't be charmed, frightened, or take fire damage. Okay. So he can't be fireballed. Multi-attack. Verminard makes 2 Nightbringer attacks and uses Malediction. Nightbringer is 12 bludgeoning plus 10 radiant and can blind somebody. It's not a lot, right? That's pretty low. That's 22 points of damage. We just saw Draconian doing like pretty close to that. Not a lot. Verminard utters an unholy word and uses Malediction. So it can do 2 attacks plus Malediction. Verminard utters an unholy word causing profane fire to descend on one creature Verminard can see within 60 feet. DC 18 saving throw. 11 necrotic plus 11 radiant. 22, not bad. That's still pretty low, right? That's, again, CR 17. Characters are going to be like level 12-ish. Yeah. Spellcasting has a bunch of spells. Anything special here? Bane, Freedom, These are all spells that you should say he has them. He's probably not going to be using them. Bonus action, Dragon Queen's Favor. Verminard or one creature he can see within 60 feet magically regains 17 hit points. So the argument would be like, oh, look at this. This is why his hit points are so low, because he can heal 17. A, you're burning his bonus action, and B, I have to remember that. And I forget that crap all the time. I always forget this stuff. So just give him, it's the same thing. Like him healing him, players hate it. They hate to watch. If the loss aversion of monsters healing sucks, it makes sense for a troll. I would probably make this that it can do it to another creature and then give him the hit points he should have, because I think he should totally have hit points. Verminard takes 3 legendary actions. Tactical movement. He can move without provoking. It's funny that like everybody has that now. Fervent Strike makes 1 Nightbringer attack if the attack hits. This seems to be some other tech that they're using, is the give them 1 attack but bump up the damage to make up for it. But his damage output is way low. He can cast a spell for 3 actions, but none of those are really that big a deal. His damage output is way low. Now, is he a damage guy or is he a commander, right? If we get, his role isn't to do damage. Yeah. Then let him do damage anyway, because if he's not going to be doing it, then it's okay. In the Sly Flourish equation, he should be doing about 119 damage per round. And instead, what we see is he is doing 22 plus, so he's doing 44 with his attacks. I have that right, 2 Nightbringer attacks. So that's 22, 44, 66 for his normal attacks. And then he can do Fervent Strike, which is another Nightbringer attack. So that's another. So it's 88 plus 7 is 95. So he's doing 95 damage a round. 5.58. So pretty low. I would definitely up his damage. If you gave him one extra Nightbringer attack, or you let him do Malediction on multiple creatures, I would let him do that on 3 targets. So if he can do a couple of Nightbringer attacks plus Malediction on 3 different targets at range, he can hit your back line, which is dangerous. It increases his threat as a legendary monster, but it doesn't. You're not going to kill one dude because you only get to attack 3 different targets. But it means your mages and your backline, all the people that are hiding or in a way, he can hit them with Malediction, doing 22 points of damage to each of them. That's not bad. You might even boost that up. Again, depending on the level they are, like if I double that damage so that he's doing 4d10 or he's doing 40 damage instead of 22 damage on that stuff, I think he would be pretty effective. He would scare the hell out of your backline. But letting him, so I would either let Malediction attack multiple targets, or I would boost their damage, or both, and give him a lot more hit points because he's just going to go down. Again, what good is that bonus action where he can heal if he takes 150 points of damage from 2 paladins and a barbarian in round 1? So, yeah. And that's it. So those are the monsters from Dragonlance creatures. They don't feel as strong to me as the monsters that are in the actual Dragonlance book. I wish those monsters were beefed up. I wonder if it's possible. Here's a theory. I don't know if this theory is true. I'm making this up. In Dragonlance, I think I don't know if they talk about it in the book, but in the design videos, they mention the fact that the encounters in Dragonlance are harder. I wonder if the Dragonlance monsters are supposedly harder for their challenge rating than they typically are, to make up for the fact that the characters are more powerful because they get like feats at first level, and they get more feats. They get 2 extra feats, I think, for Dragonlance characters. So if they make the creatures harder, they do a little bit more damage. They're doing like Kobold Press level damage, right? We looked at that last time. I wonder if the design of those monsters are beefed up, and these guys didn't go through that process to make them more dangerous for the fact that the characters are. But does that mean that monsters overall are getting more dangerous for their challenge rating? According to Wizards, they're getting to where I think they should be, but not if you're getting 4 freaking feats at 4th level, 3 up to 2 extra feats. Is that making up for it? I don't know. So that is the Monstrous Compendium Volume 2. It's free. I'll say that it's free, and they're not bad. And like I'm nitpicking, because that's what I do. I nitpick about these kinds of things. These are my little bugaboos, right? Not enough damage, not enough hit points. Very common for legendary monsters. In my opinion, almost all of them have this problem. Many of them have this problem. And I like to offer solutions. And the solutions are you give it an extra attack, right? Pretty straightforward. Give them extra attacks, up the damage, up the hit points. Very easy to do. And then they can be a threat. And also you can keep your hands on those dials, and you can decide, like, given my players, given their capabilities, given what's going on, given the feeling that I want this battle to have, should I tweak these numbers a little bit? Go ahead and tweak them. It's okay. But it's free, right? You get free stuff. You get Verminard, you get Ember. That's kind of cool. So good things. I dig it. I'm happy with that. I don't typically preview Arcadia from MCDM on this show. I am a subscriber. I am a big fan of it. I think Arcadia is MCDM's monthly D&D related magazine that they run on the MCDM Patreon. I'm linking to all this. I'm linking to the MCDM Patreon below. I love MCDM. I have 2 articles that I've written for MCDM. I don't typically spotlight them on the show. And the reason why is I don't think they need my help. I think that Arcadia is already very popular, and MCDM has a far bigger, Matt Colville, of course, has a far bigger platform than I do. They don't really need me to pitch it. So I try to pitch things for things that you aren't going to hear about a lot on YouTube already. But there was one article in this most recent Arcadia Volume 2 that I thought, first of all, the artwork. Let me talk just a little bit about Arcadia. Arcadia is on the order of like a 24 to 36 page PDF online magazine. Fantastic art, fantastic editing, fantastic design. They go through a huge, probably the best playtesting regiment that I've seen for almost any company, maybe even first or third party. I'm not sure, because we don't know exactly how Wizards does their playtesting. They go through a very strong playtesting segment, and the magazine is excellent. It usually has about 3 to 4 I think it's usually about 3 articles per issue, and you can subscribe to the MCDM Patreon for $10, and $10 gets you back access to all the previous issues that they've done, 22 previous issues, and then every month you get a new one. It's a fantastic service. I do get a review copy, but I also pay for the Patreon. I'm one of the legacy that got it for $5, and I'm keeping that legacy. And so I do support it with my own money, but I do get preview copies. And I think this was last month's issue. And there was one They're all the articles are really excellent. All the stuff that's in here is really cool. But this one really caught my attention. I said, this is something I'd like to talk about on the show because this is a really neat idea. And the idea here is this concept that Will Doyle is a fantastic D&D designer. He has written for a bunch of the hardcover books. He did Curse of Strahd, wrote a bunch of Curse of Strahd. He wrote a bunch of Tomb of Annihilation. Will Doyle and his partner also wrote, Wild Beyond the Witchlight. So a lot of chops for Will Doyle. Very, very smart. I had the honor of meeting him a couple of times. I got stuck in an airport with him one time. We were both waiting for flights, and I got to sit and chat with him for a long time. Really, really good dude and excellent designer. And he wrote this article that's a really interesting take on D&D and 5e overall called Heroic Champions. The idea of heroic champions is, what if you wanted to play a one-on-one D&D game, but instead of having like a normal character with maybe a sidekick and then dramatically reducing the amount of monsters that they would battle when they're going through it, what if you built a different kind of heroic character that could stand for a group of 4 regular D&D characters? So in the old days, they used to call this a gestalt character, like a character where you mash together multiple character options into one character. And you would, instead of having like a subclass, you might have multiple subclasses and stuff. So they used to do this in the 3rd edition days and stuff like that. In this case, it's like, how do you build one character that's got enough stuff to handle a group? And I was immediately like, wow, that's really cool. And the idea is, not only are you telling a one-on-one tale, first of all, one-on-one D&D is something I think is very underserved and underused. I think that more of us should be running more one-on-one D&D games, because it helps in so many ways. You can build a story around one character. The whole story of a campaign can be built around the background of one character. You can draw in all their personal connections. You can draw on their background, because you don't have to worry about 3 or 4 other characters that you also have to do this with. It's one character. I've done it for my wife and I have played one-on-one D&D games. That was great. I did a one-on-one game with Enrique. You can see a video for that. I did a whole video series where we ran through Dragon of Icespire Peak with Enrique and I one-on-one. Fantastic. Really, really fun. That gives you a good example of what it can look like and how fun it can be. So I love one-on-one D&D. I think it is underserved. It helps you with scheduling. It's much easier to schedule. The games are faster, so you can get a lot more done in a shorter amount of time. There's so many advantages to one-on-one D&D that I really think are underserved. So I'm really excited to see this. I don't know if this will go to faster, but all the other benefits are there. You can focus on the character. Scheduling is easier, all that kind of stuff. So the idea that Will points out here is, what if you built out a character that had all of these features? And in this sense, it is a totally different character class called a heroic class. And the heroic class has certain features that let it stand on its own, as almost as though it were a group of characters. So you get heroic exploits. You learn to perform 3 special stunts that allow you to take special actions or gain unique advantages, sometimes during your turn, sometimes on other creatures' turns. So you get to act more often. That's a big one, is how do you take enough actions to account for the fact that you're one character that's acting at 4? This heroic exploits is a way to do that. Exploits are chosen from the list available to your heroic class and require no action to perform. You can use the same heroic exploit more than once during a round, and you can use more than one exploit per turn. Again, keeping up that action economy. Can't use the same exploit more than once in the same turn, yours or another's. You can't use the heroic exploits while incapacitated, surprised, or otherwise unable. Cool. Heroic recovery. You're able to draw on reserves of stamina, determination, supernatural to heal yourself and shrug off debilitating conditions. At any point during your turn, no action required. You can regain hit points equal to your con score, not your modifier, plus 5 times your heroic class level. That's a lot of hit points. In addition, you can end any of the following conditions: blinded, deafened, incapacitated, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned. Once you use this feature, you must finish a short or long rest before you can do it again. So heroic recovery is like an instantaneous drop all of the status effects that are on you and heal, but you can only do so once every short rest. 2 times that rest at 6th level, 3 times at 13th. Interesting that these are just slightly above the tiers. So you get a 6th level instead of 5th. That's interesting. Heroic Fortune, you're blessed with an uncanny ability to escape harm. When you fail a saving throw or hit by an attack, you can re-roll the save or force the attack that hit you to be rolled again. Then choose either roll, potentially changing the outcome. Additionally, you recover. You can use this 3 times, but you can only use it once on a specific thing when you finish a short or long rest. So you can shrug off a lot. You can say, nope, you didn't hit me. You can also say, no, I don't want to fail that save. That with heroic recovery means you can take a lot of things hitting you because you're going to be the target. Remember, I was just talking about Verminard is going to be the bullseye. Well, you're going to be the bullseye of every monster. So you need a lot of stuff like this. Ability score improvements. Not only do you get normal ability score improvements, when you reach 4th level, you get, and again at 8th, 12th, 16th, and 19th, you can increase one ability score of your choice by 2, a full point up. Or you can increase 2 ability scores. I guess that is, so you're not using the normal class stuff. So that's period. Hit points and healing, carefully utilizing, The word utilize bugs me. Just say use. Carefully using your heroic exploits, heroic fortune, and heroic recovery features during combat can help your character evade attacks and minimize damage. As an additional counter to being the sole focus of the enemy attacks, telling you why, heroic characters are gifted with greater reserves of hit points. At first level, your character has 2 hit dice with the type determined by your class. You start with hit points equal to the sum of the highest roll of both dice plus your con score. So you get level 1, lot of hit points. Each time you advance a new level, you gain 2 additional hit dice, and your hit point maximum increases by an amount equal to the highest roll of both dice plus your con score. So you got hit dice, but they're maximized the whole way. Lot of hit points. And you get a bunch of gold. So there are 3 different character archetypes. It doesn't seem like they have a dedicated cleric one. Instead, they have a spellcaster one that looks like it's going to combine it. But all of the information that you need here to level up this character is built into these things. And the idea is like you're Conan, right? You're Conan the Barbarian. Conan is off on his own and he's fighting everything on his own, right? He's out there. Think about those old like Frazetta paintings of Conan, right? Heroic spellcaster. So you can see all the different stuff. What I'm really interested in is I would love to hear what the playtesting of this was like and how it worked out. I haven't run it yet. And will I? I'm not sure. Do I want to run this or do I want to run the old way of a reduced game? I'm not sure, but this is a really cool idea. And if somebody wanted to play sort of a high power one-on-one game, if you wanted to run like a hardback adventure, the really advantage of this is think about how this opens up all of your books that you've got. You want to run Dragonlance, but you're like, I don't really have a group for Dragonlance. Do you have one friend who wants to play? And you're like, guess what? You're the hero of Kryn. Pick one of these, use these things, and you can run through that entire adventure with one player and one DM, one character, and run it as a group of 4. I think it's a really fantastic idea. I'm eager to hear how people use this and how it works, because it sounds like it could be a really strong idea. I love that there's like good DM tips here. So really neat things. So check that out. That is an Arcadia Issue 22. You can pick up Arcadia Issue 22 individually if you don't want to subscribe to the Patreon for any reason, or if you jump into the MCDM Patreon, you can get all of the issues of Arcadia plus all of the future issues. Excellent stuff. Really cool. Check that out. I am a huge fan of Raging Swan Press's products. Raging Swan makes really excellent often focused on random tables for firing off your imagination to fill out your adventures, to fill out your locations, to fill out all kinds of stuff. I have a whole pile of, it's like 12 books. I've got a whole bunch of Raging Swan books over on my bookshelf that I love and adore. I have talked about most recently the Dread Thingonomicon. This giant, I'm going to throw my back out picking up this huge book. I did a spotlight on this one before. You can check that out in previous episodes of that show. I can't even get it back on the bookshelf. My shoulder went out. So really cool book. So the fine folks at Raging Swan sent me a preview copy and a review copy of the GM's Miscellany, the GM's Miscellany Dungeon Dressing for 5th edition. You can tell the ones that have that are tied to a specific version of the game by the color of the cover. In this case, a red cover is for 5e. Big book, 270 pages, black and white printing on the inside if you get the print on demand version from Drive-Thru RPG. I think these are books, first of all, these are books that are going to last you forever. These books, even though this is a 5th edition based book, there is a GM's Miscellany that is not 5e based. So if you are specifically looking for a book that will last with any version of the game, you can take a look at that one. That one will have a black cover instead of the red cover. But this one has specific magic items and specific things in it that are focused around 5th edition, but not a ton. Not piles of it. So most of this book is going to work with any version of D&D or any fantasy RPG in much the same way that the other ones did. But it is definitely has a 5th edition focus. But what I really like is when you get the print version of these books. And how much is the print version? Print version of the book is $30 in soft cover or $40 in hardcover. That includes the PDF. Pretty reasonably priced for a good sized book like that. Print on demand prices have gone up a lot, so we're starting to see a lot of print on demand books that are higher priced than we normally are used to. But probably still useful. Again, if you are building out your RPG library, having a copy of a book like this on your shelf is something that, you could definitely use as the versions of the game are changing, as things go in the future. There's a lot of material in here that you can use. If you want to be truly future-proof, and if you want to get it for a little less money, you can get the system-neutral version of Dungeon Dressing. It is a smaller book. It's 216 pages to 250 pages, but has a lot of the same material that's in this one. And that one is definitely useful for the future. So if you are interested in that kind of GM Miscellany Dungeon Dressing book, do I have that too? I do. I have the soft cover version of that. told you, I have all these books. So a lot of the same material. If you already own this one, you probably don't need to get the 5e one. I don't necessarily think that I would get the 5e one. I don't think there's enough 5e material in it to warrant buying it again. But if you are strictly a 5th edition DM, if you're running 5th edition games and you're picking up either of them, the 5th edition version is something I would definitely pick up. Let's take a look at the table of contents. Nice forward that talks about what are the value of these kinds of books? What do they bring to you? How do they shake up your mind? Random tables, the right focus and the right lens of random tables can do a whole lot. I've seen, and knowing what that lens and focus is really tricky. I've talked about that on the show before, that sometimes you get tables that are just too narrow. Like I'm nitpicking about like every single object on a desk. I don't have time for that. And then other ones are like, let's talk about your world. And that's a little too vague. So you want to find the right balance of the focus of a random table. Is it big enough to matter that it's worth me spending the time to roll on it, but not so big that it's too general and it doesn't really help me? Figuring that out is hard. Lots of good information, lots of good advice. I really love the artwork is fantastic. The artwork is like this old school black and white line art, really, really cool. Makes you feel like you're playing a game that's 50 years old. Instead of the modern aesthetic is really cool too. I'm very happy. Like the Dragonlance book looks great, but it's kind of fun to see that old black and white stuff. So you can see here all the different kinds of dungeon dressing: altars, archways, bridges, captives, ceilings, all the stuff that you might find in a dungeon. What are the different things that you can roll on? Tons and tons of different random tables. Most of this stuff is the stuff that you find in the system neutral one as well. But then it's when you get into these things like tricks and traps and other things that have statistics to them where there's a focus on 5e. More stuff on dungeon dressing, doors, stairs, tables, tricks, wandering monsters. We're going to probably jump into that because I think that's where you see some of the 5th edition stuff. And, here are examples. Let's see. This is the wandering. What are they doing? That's really good. What action are they taking? These are the kinds of tables that we don't have enough of. This is actually something I saw in the Spelljammer book too. The attitude of the people that are coming to you and how that attitude can change is really interesting. But what are the different monsters or different groups that are doing? What are they doing here? That is a really good way to shake it up. So here we can see that they have the names of like Intellect Devourer, Doppelgangers, other, gelatinous cubes. These are definitely straight 5th edition monsters. But you can see like it doesn't have the whole stat block. It's just mentioning the monster name. Again, giving it a lot of universal use. I think where I definitely saw 5th edition specific stuff is in traps and things like that. So the DCs, whenever they have DCs for things, those DCs are 5th edition based DCs. That's definitely something you know. So look at that art. Isn't that art really cool? Really great stuff. Treasures. The treasures have 5th edition based treasures in here. Stone of Good Luck, Eyes of the Eagle, Slippers of Spider Climbing. Lots of stuff like this. Again, DC checks that are based on 5th edition. So that's the kind of level of 5th edition sort of stuff you're going to see in here. But the bulk of it is going to be pretty universal stuff, which I think is fine. When I would pick up a book like this, I wouldn't pick it up for lots of detailed mechanics on 5th edition stuff. You want that, you get Kobold Press, you get like Monster Books or Treasure Books from Kobold Press. They're going to really cover this. This one is really about filling out your ideas for your dungeons with lots of different details and just happens to have 5th edition based stuff. I love these treasure hoards. So there's a whole set of treasure hoards that you don't have to go roll up an entire treasure set from the Dungeon Master's Guide. Instead, you can just pick a hoard. You roll a roll, and it will tell you what it has in it. And it has the gold and everything already lined up. Very, very handy for 5th edition treasure hoards. The likelihood, if you were to drop one of these multiple times in different groups, I don't think anybody would care. Otherwise, if you're running it for your group, you can just scratch that one off. And you can say, that treasure hoard is done. What is the challenge rating? So these are challenge rating 5 to 10 hordes. So, this is cool. So they have hordes, 20 different hordes for each tier. So that's lots of different hordes for lots of different tiers. This is all based on the Dungeon Master Guide math. Really, really handy stuff. Like this is good, lazy DM stuff. You want a treasure hoard that has a lot of detail in it, but you don't feel like rolling a million times. This is perfect. I think this is a fantastic addition to, and a good reason that if you were running 5th edition games, the treasure hoards alone are probably a good reason to pick up the 5th edition version of the Dungeon Miscellany to the general one. So that, that was something I remember when I was flipping through this, that caught my eye. And the fact that it's got 20 different treasure hoards for 20 different ones. In the back, we have a bunch of maps. These are Dyson logo. It looks like, I think there's just the one map that sort of dropped in there. Like, hey, you need a map? We got a page to fill out. We'll drop in a Dyson map. So Dyson definitely has just some of the maps in there. Thoughts about dungeon design. Again, these are more universal. Again, we have some Dyson maps that are thrown in here that can help give you some ideas. Really, really good stuff. So I love Raging Swan stuff. I love their books. This one is, big, meaty book, ready to fill out your dungeons with all kinds of stuff. If you are a 5th edition DM and you do not have any of these books, I would definitely pick up the 5th edition GM's Miscellany for Dungeon Dressing. Fantastic book. Really good to pick up. If you play in other worlds than 5th edition, if you're doing other fantasy RPGs, you can pick up the original. It's a little bit cheaper, but if you want things like that, Treasure Hordes, it's an extra 30, 40 pages worth of material that's in this book. You want to pick up the 5th edition one. And even as we look at like 1D&D and what's happening, I don't think there's hardly anything in here that's going to be completely like obsolete when 1D&D comes out. I think that books like these have an amazing shelf life, and I think you could use it forever. That is Raging Swans GM Miscellany Dungeon Dressing. You can find a link to the show notes. You can find a link to pick up the book from Drive-Thru RPG in the show notes below. It's interesting. There's a lot of talk. We were just talking in the Twitch chat here about the value of random tables for firing up a GM's imagination. And there's been some talk about text-based artificial intelligence systems that are getting out there. I forget what they're called. Somebody, OpenChat GPT or something like that. Somebody in the chat remind me what these new artificial intelligence, Chat GPT. Yes, make me a random treasure hoard. I'll probably look into these more. But really, when you look at these AI-based things, both for visual, creating images of stuff or for creating text, from a DM's perspective, these are really just very fancy random generators. That underneath AI, when you dig real far down into what an AI is, it's a whole bunch of little linear regression or different regression algorithms chained together into giant networks that nobody can understand. That nobody understands how they managed to get to where they got to. But they're tiny little random tables. But the reality is that they can do a lot of the same purpose. So first of all, if you think you're missing the boat because you're not using something like Chat GPT, books like this are kind of that, right? We roll on tables, we get ideas. The ideas give us things that we want to drop into our game. They fuel our imagination. The AI ones are a little bit fancier and they can come up with some pretty wild stuff, but they're essentially just fancy random generators that sound more natural in the end. And the value of that stuff to DMs is really, really good because it pushes our brains out of the troughs that we're in. We are embedded in our little lanes, and we don't it's hard for us to break out of these ideas. It means we come up with stereotypical ideas. We come up with boring ideas that have been done 50 times. We come up with lots of stuff. When we take random tables like this and we shake up our brains with them to come up, oh, wow, I didn't even think about it. That's a really cool idea. What if it was this other thing? We can come up with a lot of different ones. And so I think both random tables that we see in books like this, from the Lazy DM's Companion and these other ones, especially when you have ones where you can combine multiple tables together, it gives you this multiple capability. If you have a D20 table, that's great, that's 20. But if you have a second D20 table and you combine the two, now you got 400. If you have a third, 8,000. The options keep it multiplying out. You get really, really powerful stuff. That's where you can get a table, a single page that's 5 interlinked tables, maybe some that you can roll multiple times that can have millions of combinations of abilities off of one sheet. It's really powerful. I think a lot of the AI stuff can help in that regard too. There's questions about what else that is going to do for us, right? How else is that going to change society and stuff like that? I'm always like, we'll see. We'll see what it does. I don't think like artists are going to be completely out of commission. I think there is a question of like when you're using AI art versus when you're using physical art. There's a lot of question of like, what did they seed it with? And are they seeding it on my art? How do I know? Right? There's a lot of questions like that. But, from a DM's perspective, very valuable tools, I think. Let's do some Patreon questions. Every month on the Sly Flourish Patreon, patrons can ask a D&D related question. I answer every question on the thread, but I also talk about them here on this show. Some of them I talk about here on this show. Some of them I will turn into larger articles or videos if it's a topic that I think is really a good one to expand upon. Tim S. says, what are your tips for running high-level, 20th level one-shots? I'm not so concerned about players being powerful, but players not knowing their characters and abilities, analysis paralysis, and combat turns taking too long, theirs and mine, that the game becomes a drag instead of fun. If you are running a 20th level game, you are asking for some of these problems. I love the 20th level can be really fun. I think maybe my favorite D&D game of all time was a 20th level one shot that one James Intercasso ran for myself and a bunch of friends of ours, running his adventure Invasion from the Planet of Tarrasques, in which you fight multiple Tarrasques, including in one spot, spoiler, facing maybe 100 Tarrasques and an Archmage. Fun, really cool. But you have to be prepared to run that kind of stuff. So a few tips. So one is accept the fact that it's going to be long and hard and you're going to face some of these things. Analysis paralysis, going to happen. Combat turns taking too long, going to happen. prepare for that. Do not expect that, oh, we're going to be able to pack this into a 4-hour session. I might tell them, hey, we're going to do 1 or 2, like plan a 4-hour game, but say like it might take a session or 2 to do it. Maybe don't make it just a one-shot. If you're going to do a one-shot, consider focusing it around one single big battle. Build your story in there, build some fun exploration, build some character hooks, have some role-playing opportunities, but pack it into a battle. Roll initiative from the beginning, let it take the entire session, and have multiple events that are taking place during that battle so that you're off to that, so that you can pack it all into that one session. A couple things that you can do. One is tell them to stick to Player's Handbook only. Don't let them pick options from other books and other classes. Say it must be options from the Player's Handbook. Again, if they're using D&D Beyond, be really careful because D&D Beyond gives you every option and doesn't tell you where they came from. So all of a sudden you have Strixhaven backgrounds in your Forgotten Realms game. It's happened. It's happened to a lot of people. Or you get feats from weird-ass places. So you might say the material has to be from the Player's Handbook, have to be core classes from the Player's Handbook. You can limit their subclasses. Say that you can only play things like the Champion or the Life Cleric. Right? Pick every one of the subclasses, every one of the classes has a default subclass that is easier to use, that's designed to be simpler in play. Choose just those subclasses, or ask the players to pick only those subclasses. The other thing you can do is limit feats. Either don't let them choose feats and only have them use ability score improvements, or again, just picking feats that are from the Player's Handbook. If you reduce and say there are no feats, that's really limiting the characters. A lot of players are going to be like, why is it so boring? But it'll make simple characters that are easy to run. So that's an option. No multi-classing. Do not let them multi-class. Say that they have to stick to one core class. Those simplifications, will reduce their power. Absolutely. It reduces the power of the character, but it reduces also analysis paralysis, characters not knowing their abilities, all these things that you bring up. Cut those out. And if you cut those out, you can still have a 20th level game, and explain to them why. Saying like, in order to keep this kind of fast and focused and fun, we're gonna stick to these things. But those are the default rules. The default rules are no feats, no multiclass, and Player's Handbook. Like that's what the Player's Handbook expects you to choose. Feats and multiclassing are optional rules that we stack on. Just everybody's used to using them. And at 20th level, you're like, oh man, I'm boosting up ability scores that don't matter worth a lick. You could also limit certain feats if you wanted to. Pick the complicated feats like your Polearm Master. Say, come up with your sub list of feats, toughness, and pick the feats that are straightforward. Say these feats you could choose from. The ones that are always on, always fired up, and you don't have to pay attention to them. But the ones that have lots of nitpicky bits, pull those out. That's an option as well. So those are the tips that I offer 20th level game. The big one is accept the fact that you're running a 20th level game, and the kinds of things you're talking about are the kinds of things that happen in 20th level games. So that's really tough. Kirk T says, campaign hook versus spiral campaign model in Sandbox West Marches style game. I'm working on a Sandbox West Marches style game with an emphasis on the exploration pillar. While there'll be several possible villains and fronts, the goal is for the players to discover them as the exploration spirals out from the home base. I don't care which villains or fronts they discover or trigger. That all depends on the directions the exploration takes, and I'll flesh them out as they discover them. When discussing campaign hooks, Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master suggests an epic story arc and stresses the value of the players knowing up front what the arc is. Example, Stop Thuron's Rise. How do we reconcile this with spiral campaign development in a West Marches style game? Excellent question. First of all, thank you for reading the Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master and picking that out and recognizing that that's in there. And the answer is like, you don't necessarily have to have a theme like that those themes are built for more kind of straightforward campaigns, less West Marches style campaigns. But instead of having like a central goal like that, kill Strahd or defeat, stop Tiamat's rise or whatever, you can think about the theme that you have for your West Marches style game and focus on that theme. Is the theme that it's relatively agrarian farmer types that are sitting upon ancient dungeons that they don't even know anything about? Is it in the middle of a war? Is there a great war that's going on in the area? What are the events that set the stage for the entire area of your West Marches style game? Make that central theme and think about how that central theme affects everything else. I think even if I don't run West Marches style games, so I'm not an expert at all in West Marches style games. I know about them, I've read about them, but I've never run them. I've never played in them really. So they're a different style of D&D, and it's definitely everything in Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master is optional. Right? Every idea is only if you use what works and throw away what doesn't. So if that doesn't work, if that idea of the theme doesn't work for West Marches, you don't have to do it. I will say though that I know if I were running or playing a West Marches style game, I would want to have some kind of theme or some kind of event, something to show me that the world is a living place and is moving on. If the world is too static, if nothing is really happening, then it's going to feel very dry, I think. It can feel very dry. So I think you still want something going on. It could be a darkness rises to the east. It could be, rumors are that the Lich King of Aragafat is rising from the temples of the west. Things could still be going on that are affecting it. If you think about like Ghosts of Saltmarsh, you could run a West Marches style game in Ghosts of Saltmarsh very easily. You could, that you have Saltmarsh, the village of Saltmarsh, the town of Saltmarsh as your central home base, and then things both in the water and things out in the land, in the forests and everything else, and the characters could go to it. That book is actually really good for that style of game. But you still have a big political pressure cooker going on there. You still have the king is applying pressure to the town that the town doesn't like, and that the independent groups of the town aren't like. And by the way, there seems to be some unknown force that is causing pressure there. You can still have that theme. And even though it's a West Marches style game, these events can be still growing in the background. So I wouldn't throw away the idea of not having that central theme or that story arc up front. Instead, I would make the theme, I might pull back on it being like the central goal, like kill Strahd, but you might still have a theme that you're thinking about and make that focus. And then think about how all of the events that are going on, and you're going to learn this while it's going on with the players too. How do the actions of the players kind of feed into this? But I think too much of it's just a standard village and you go off and you explore dungeons. I think that could get pretty boring pretty fast. My feeling is it seems really cool and it seems very old school and it seems like a neat way to go. And there's many aspects of West Marches I like. But if the world is too static, I think it's going to be kind of boring. So I think that theme can help keep the world dynamic, even if you're running a very open-ended game. Brett M. says, I am considering adding minions and mobs to a campaign that I'm currently running. We just finished a session where the combat turned into a bit of a slog, and I'm worried that trying to add minions may just bog the combat down even further. Any thoughts on how to implement this? I've seen you're running large numbers in monsters in the lazy workbook, but I'm still concerned this adds a level of complexity that will stall out a session. So that's a good question. The whole point of running minions is that they won't stall down a session and that you can run dozens to hundreds of monsters as fast and sometimes faster than running typical monsters. You mentioned the Lazy DM workbook. The Lazy DM's Companion has a more filled out section on how to run minions. The idea of using hordes of monsters is something I've been spending a lot of time thinking about, and my views on it, they change. I kind of try different things. I've tried a bunch of different ones, and I think you can think about all of these different options as modules for how to run minions. There's a bunch of different ways you can run them, and you can look at them and say, are there specific ways that work for the style of minions I want to run? The Lazy DM's Companion has a few of these options. So you can find a few of these options under the Running Hordes section of the Lazy DM's Companion. One page that talks about running hordes, but you really want to think about it as specific things that you want to drop in. And there's a few different ones that you want to consider. A, how do you track hit points of the monsters, of the mob? If you have a big horde, how are you going to manage hit points? That's one question. How are you going to manage their attacks? How do you manage how many of them get hit by stuff? That is another thing that you want to talk about. How are you going to handle areas of effect that they are getting hit by? How are the things you're going to deal with that? And each of them have different ways that you can consider dropping into your game. So the ways that I offer in running hordes is in the section of the Companion is that you can pool damage. So as a horde takes damage, you track that damage up. And every time that damage equals the hit points that a monster has, that monster is thrown out. And if the damage is more than 2 or 3 or 4 monsters, you pull 2, 3, or 4 monsters out. You can either roll over the damage and keep the tally, or you can just reset it after every monster kill. That is certainly one way to do it. There's another interesting way to do this that MCDM has done in their horde rules when they look at Flea Mortals, their monster book, which is the idea that the hit points of a monster is a damage threshold. So you could have it that anytime a monster is hit with an attack, that monster is dead. Anytime that monster fails a saving throw, it is dead. They're super fast. Anytime that monster takes damage that is greater than its hit points, by any source, whether it lost an attack roll, it also dies. And that gives it a damage threshold. That means you can't peg them off with magic missiles, or doing 1 point of damage wipes out entire hordes because it did 1 point. It has to reach over that threshold. The advantage of that is you don't have to track damage at all. It's only did the attack do enough damage. So that's a way to do it too. The pooling damage is pretty straightforward too. I've run pooling damage with hundreds of monsters, and you can still do that too. It's very quick. It does require a little bit of math. It does require hit point tracking. So the minion idea of if an attack hits a target and it dies, you can pull it off the table. If it fails a saving throw, it dies, you pull it off the table. If it takes damage from any source that's greater than its amount of hit points, it dies. But if it takes damage from less of a source, you don't track it at all. It's as though it took no damage, or you just say it took damage, but you don't really track it. That's not a bad way to go either. That's all in how to handle damage, how much damage you take. Then there's the how do you handle attacks. There's a few different ways to do this too. The method that I recommend is 1/4 of attacks succeed. So if you're getting attacked by 8 skeletons, 2 of them are going to hit you, and they do their damage. That is super fast, no rolling, very easy to do. There's always players sometimes bristle because like, you didn't even roll an attack, you just set it to damage to me. But it's really fast. So if you explain to them, it's making the assumption that your armor class is 15 higher than their attack bonus, which is pretty good. So most people are going to get the benefit of it. There's a few where it'll be higher, but even still, the likelihood that it goes from 2 to 1 is not really high. That it would go from 1/4 to like an 1/8 or a 1/5 or whatever. But you can change that. You can round it up or down depending on circumstances. If you feel like the character that got attacked really is vulnerable to attacks, you might have it do half instead of 1/4. Another way to do it, and I offer this in the book, is that you can essentially take the amount of damage that all of the monsters would do. So if you have 8 skeletons and they're all attacking at once, and they would do 5 damage each, that's 40 damage. And you split that damage up into 1/4 and a half. So you have the damage, you quarter the damage, right? So in this case, what I say, 40, so it'd be 10. And you roll 2 attack rolls. Each attack roll does 1/4 of the damage of the total amount. If both attacks hit, they take half. If one attack hits, they take 1/4. If neither attack hits, they take 0. So, and you can scale that up. If it's 200 dudes, you can still break it up and say, well, 200 guys doing this much damage, this is how it's going to split up. No one's going to get attacked by 200. If you're getting attacked by 200 guys, you're going to get killed. But that's a way to do it too. The adjudicating areas of effect, you can think of that like the damage threshold as well. If the area of effect does enough damage that it covers the hit points of the monster, just have them die. You could also roll saving throws, and if the damage, a lot of times, like if you're throwing like a fireball on a bunch of skeletons, even if they make their save, they're still dead. You can just remove them all from the area of effect. So lots of different ways to handle it. The Companion talks about it, but there's also these ideas. MCDM is handling it with minions. So there's a lot of different ways that you can handle this idea. But the intent is to pick ones that are the easiest and the fastest, so they don't bog down the game. The only big recommendation is tell your players how it works before you start the battle. Make sure they understand how you're doing it and why you're doing it, so they recognize, oh yeah, this is us, and explain that the whole reason you're doing this is this cinematic, crazy John Wick style 40 guys are attacking me at once. It's the House of Blue Leaves scene from Kill Bill, right? One character facing 88 assassins. There weren't actually 88 of them. They're fighting all these assassins. You want that like quick, one sweep kills 3 guys. That's the other thing, is if a character attacks somebody and does enough damage to kill that person, the damage carries over to the next and then the next. So you can sweep through. I think both the MCDM rules and mine talk about how creatures, that melee characters can sweep through and kill 2 or 3 creatures at a time in minion rules. The whole point is to make these really big cinematic battles. So whatever rules you can apply that make that cinematic battle feel cinematic is really good. Last thing I'll offer is a lot of times people get caught on a grid. If you're running it on a grid, you're like, oh my God, I got to move 20 skeletons onto the grid. Don't do that. Just draw a circle, use some kind of tool, or describe it. Hey, by the way, in addition to these big skeletal veterans that you're fighting, there is also 50 other skeletons in this room, and they're all attacking you as well. And just treat it like area damage, but then say, oh, if they cast Turn Undead, all those guys are wiped out. So the whole key is remember that minions are meant to be destroyed. So lean in towards destroying them. They're meant to harass and destroy and be a fun way for the characters to really cleave down a lot of guys. That's what you're focused on. There are links. I'm going to offer a couple of different links to things about running minions down in the show notes below, because it is something that I think is actually really important. I think having a good way to run dozens to hundreds of monsters in a D&D battle is one of the things that makes D&D feel really cool, and we miss out on that if we don't have some kind of horde rules. So check out the links in the show notes below. Brett, great question. Thank you for that. My friends, I want to thank you today for hanging hanging out with me while we talked about all things D&D. If you enjoyed this show and you want more stuff like this, subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. You get an adventure generator PDF with all the stuff you need in order to run your own first level adventures, including a single page front and back simple 5th edition guideline that you can use to build characters and run D&D games. All in a very small, I think it's 3 pages front and back, can run D&D games for a long time. Check that out by subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. You also get a weekly D&D related article sent to your inbox. Link for that is in the show notes below. You can become a patron of Sly Flourish. Patrons get access to all kinds of tools, tips, tricks, dedicated adventures, the City of Arches sourcebook, dedicated Discord channels, the monthly Q&A, lots of different things that patrons get. It's a very low price. You can subscribe to that in the show notes below, or you can pick up any of my books, including the Lazy DM's Companion, which you just saw, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, the Lazy DM Worksbook, all in beautiful print versions available directly from my store. The link for that is in the show notes below as well. Thank you all very much. Have a great day and get out there and play some D&D.